Hello everyone, my name is Edward Sutanto and today I'll be presenting to you responsible use of AI in research. I'll first talk about introductions to ethical tensions in AI, several case studies within this ethical tension. We'll then look at how institution and publisher responds to the rise of AI use in research, framework for responsible use of AI, and lastly, a couple of conclusions and a call for actions. So, just as an introduction to ethical tension in I think we right now understand that there has been a much rapid adoption in the use of generative AI tools, Gen AI, such as example ChatGPT, Elicit, Perplexity, Gemini, and other ChatGPT tools that you may also have used in research. There is a reason why there is this rapid adoption. This includes that using AI would allow you to have better productivities. It also allows individuals, for example, whose English, for example, are not very good, where they can use this AI as a grammar check tool to improve accessibility, so they're able to produce deliverables that are as good in terms of the English as others, as a natural language speakers. Also, additionally, this generative AI may also provide new insights for individuals that brainstorm with this AI. But along with these promises, there's also risks that are involved when we are utilizing this Gen AI for research. This includes misinformations, bias, cognitive depth, and loss of accountability too. So responsibility use of Gen AI is a key to maintaining scientific integrity, and we need to balance the promises that can even be evaluated from the use of generative AI, but also minimize all of the risks, which will go one by one in the later slide. So the first case study I want to talk about in terms of AI use is these are just to provide you the landscape of the current use of AI. This is a study that I did with a couple of global collaborators looking at use of large language models or generative AI as an artificial intelligence tools in academic research and publishing among global clinical researchers. So we surveyed around more than 220 researchers across 59 countries, and these are back in 2024 when the use of AI is obviously not as widespread as it now. In terms of the practice, 87.6% were already aware of AI tools by that time, and among those, 18.7% admitted to be using an AI in preparing publication, yet 40% did not disclose AI use in their papers. In terms of perceptions, more than half aware of feels that generative AI may have positive impacts, but around one third are unsure. You can also see that the majority, almost 80%, actually agreed that regulation and guidelines are needed to prevent abuse of AI. And in fact, although a lot of people, majority, 58.1%, mentioned that journal should allow AI tools provided there are policies to ensure of ethical issues. Additionally, there's also studies that look at authorship integrity issues. So there's a study that reports that actually early on 2024 that 14 papers already featured ChatGPT in authorship roles. So ChatGPT are named as an authorship list. And several publishers react by forbidding the inclusion of AI tools as authors. So I think the key takeaway here is that we as a research communities are using AI. This is a done deal at this moment. The cat is already out of the bag. We do see its promises, but we're currently wrestling in how to do so ethically and responsibility. So in terms of the risks that I was mentioning to you just now, and we'll look at bias and hallucinations. So generative AI reflects and data and amplifies biases in the training data, because when, like for example, OpenAI, Meta, and other companies, this giant tech companies, made or created their own AI tools. They're using their training data, um, research, publications, papers, newsletter, and um, other output in order for them to train this AI to recognize pattern, recognize words, etc. Therefore, if your original training data have a certain biases to it, means that those biases will still be reflected in the output that the AI will use. So for examples, if in a certain field, you see that a lot of the studies that come are actually from high income countries, that bias might also be reflected there, where there might be an output bias from the AI, particularly in high-income country compared to the low and middle-income countries. Obviously, this means that there's a health equity risk in research that are heavily focused in high-income countries. So cancer research, those are the kind of research that are commonly conducted in high-income countries. And if you're taking it face value, that might be problematic too. Essentially, I think one of the principles that might be in tension here is justice, because unethical AI use could perpetuate these biases and these inequalities. And also, you also need to be aware about hallucinated or facts. That is to say, AI might generate information that is false or non-existent. And this not include only about facts, but it also includes about making references. So they might generate references that are, when you look up these references in Google's, and you look up these references in Scopus and other kind of tools to find digital footprints of these references, you see that these references does not exist in the first place. So it's important that we also ensure scientific validity, because unethical use may introduce fake data to the scientific literature and therefore sort of pollute our science. So I think a key takeaway again for here is that researchers who want to use AI need to be cautious when they're using AI. They need to double check everything in terms of the content that are being produced by the AI and remain accountable for what they actually publish. Now, there's also a terminology related to AI that has been recently gaining attention, which is cognitive depth. So, what is a cognitive depth? We'll use this study published by the MITs and other collaborators, MITs, that actually hypothesize that when individuals are using ChatGPT, there's a cognitive depth of using those ChatGPT. Essentially, you're losing your ability to critically think, you're losing your ability to memorize or to use your critical thinking capacity in a much more rigorous manner, because you outsource all of your critical thinking to these AI tools. So in this study, they compare three groups, which is the users who use LLM or generative AI or AI tools, and they're also differentiate this with the second group was users who use just a search engine without AI. So they're just using Google, they're just using Yahoo, or they're just using other search engine. And lastly, individuals who only use their brain, essentially no tools involved. And they ask them to write an essay for this task. And when they're writing an essay, they then examine their essay result, but they also hook these participants in an EEG, and the EEG shows that the brain-only group provided the strongest neural connectivity. So that's when how you know your brain are getting the exercise it needs, while the LLM users actually provided the weakest brain connectivities. It's also important to recognize that in this study, they actually survey the individual tools And along these three groups, the sense of authorship or the sense of ownership to the deliverables or the product that they wrote is actually lowest in the LM group and highest in the brain-only group, which is perhaps is not that surprising. What quite distressing, though, is that over the 4 months, the LLM users consistently underperform in neural activities, linguistic qualities, and behavioral measures. Essentially, the LLM users struggle to accurately recall or quote their own writing. So it's important to highlight that although generative AI might provide immediate convenience, it may introduce a cognitive debt, right? It's like your brain does not get exercise it needs, and therefore you're blunting your brain. Thus, it raises concerns about the critical thinking development and long-term learning retention. And lastly, I also want to highlight the environmental impact of AI because I feel like these are not well discussed. Generally, when you are creating a training models for the AI, there is a huge carbon footprint involved with it. So for ChatGPT 3, for example, it's estimated producing a lot of carbon dioxide, and not only about carbon dioxide, data center that are used to train this AI is actually not very environmental friendly in a way because it utilized high volume of electricity and waters. So there is an ethical tension to where you need to sort of weigh between the NI benefits and also the environmental externalities when we use AI. Obviously, that this means that when we want to be using AI, we want to make sure that we use it in a responsible manner, in an efficient manner, instead of chatting with GPT and asking like, "Hi, what is 2 plus 2?" Those consume electricity, and when you ask them this very obvious question, like questions that not necessarily require AI use, there's a negative externalities to the environment. And I think this is quite actually relevant to the global health research because high carbon footprint damages to environments obviously affect the climate change, and when the climate change get worsened, infectious disease spread too. So that's the end for subtopic 1. In subtopic 2, we'll be looking at how institution responds to AI and what is the framework for responsible use of AI. So I'll be seeing you there.